Hello and welcome to Hybrid Talk at Treasure Art Gallery. We are delighted to welcome our esteemed guest and invite you all to our gallery to talk about art. Since there is a lot of knowledge but not enough discussion, the Adda system was put on hold due to COVID lockdown. So now is the time to break out our isolation and spread our knowledge on art and culture. We have a series of discussions. Let's begin with this. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much, Tina ji. We are going to start our discussion now, taking off. The idea is we are going to be looking at the influence of key teachers at the J.J School of Art and the Delhi scene who contributed to where we are today as figurative and abstract artists since the 1970s right up to the current times. The reason we are going back in time is also because our artist who... Can you hear? Yes? So the two schools of that we are looking at is of figuration and abstraction, and they have been had a key impact on the modern and contemporary painters, that it is very important to evaluate the influence and the divisions that occurred during the time of artists like Shankar Palsekar, later on Prabhakar Kolte, Tayyab Mehta, Akbar Padamsi, and the whole progressives group. In Delhi, it was people like Krishan Khanna, Shobha Bruta, Jatin Das. So the panel seeks to uncover the primary concerns, not just about art, but about life and its values as well. Previously, art schools tended to promote traditional art and craft and academic naturalism in the arts, which was reflecting the Victorian tastes. Even the Indian crafts which received support at that time were the ones based on the European tastes. However, that changed with the coming of the moderns and the progressives, where there was a shift towards a more abstract way of thinking. And when I say abstract way of thinking, I'm not talking about non-figurative painting. I'm talking about even when the way you approach figurative painting also changed. And that is something that we would like to explore in this talk. And just seeing that the way things were visualized, they went into this uncovering the voice of the artist and looked at art with an inner eye, which is what Kolti sir talked about during the opening as well, which is the most important, and often it collapses this duality of figuration and abstraction. So we have on the panel the artist Usha Falani Pathak. Thank you so much for coming all the way from Bombay again. And then we have online, we have Manish Pushkale, if he decides to visit the online space. Another physical presence is Rahul Kumar. Hi, Rahul. We have Samar Jodha, who's the photographer. I thought it would be interesting to have a photographer as well, because it brings us into the contemporary aspect. And I do know that photography is one which is fighting for its space in the arts, even today. Even when people sort of say, oh, documentary, and photography is very realistic, quote unquote, but now when we look at Samar's work, we will discover new aspects of that. And there are other artists as well. And then we have Shukla Sawant joining us, bringing in the aesthetics and the theoretical aspect from, should be coming from GNU, coming in from there. And then we have Archana Bal Sapre, who will be telling us about her experience with Arts for All and Champatri, and the kind of, sort of union and division of abstraction and figuration that she has seen. So thank you so much, and handing you over. Ushaji, please put on your mic. And whenever you want a slide, just indicate to Anjali and she will put a slide on. It's showing on the screen.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Uh, Good evening. I thank TAG, the gallery, artists on the panel, and invitees to discuss this for making this evening possible. Uh, Before I discuss about the figuration and abstraction and the dualities in art, I would like to say a few words about my journey so far as an artist. And with your permission, I will read out my thoughts so as not to miss out anything of import. As a child, I grew up in an artistic environment and took inspiration from my father, Mr. Shankara Finani, who was a well-known commercial artist. And he had mastered the scraper board technique. Not many people know nowadays what scraper board is, but
Slide, please, Anjali.
yes. This technique was used for newspaper advertising. And on a plaster of Paris board, the German pelican ink was applied. You can see it here. No, this is people can't see probably. Can you see? Yeah. On a plaster of Paris board, the German pelican ink, black ink was applied. And after it dried, it was scraped down with a very sharp scraper to make vertical and horizontal cross lines to acquire a dot. And this drawing was made with these dots. So it was so difficult process. This process needed mastery on perspective, anatomy, and the other aspects of design. Watching my father working on these artworks, I absorbed subconsciously his qualities of perception, precision, perfection, and dedication. With the kind of knowledge I gained from this experience, I developed the vision for design. And as a child, I started rendering the colors directly on canvas without making prior sketches. Also, the drawings were made directly with ball pen without any making or any marking with pencil. I was fascinated to paint portraits right from my childhood, as I always thought that human being is the most beautiful creation of nature. While painting portrait, I always aimed at capturing the personality and character of the person, sometimes fusing both to get the essence of the person. After joining Sir J.J School of Art, I started experimenting and exploring different styles and mediums, methods to express through portrait. I must say that I was fortunate to receive the valuable guidance and active encouragement for my dedicated attempts from the masters like Professor Palchikar, master painter K.K. Hebber, Ara, Professor Sadwalkar, great master Haldankar, Professor Kolte also. After moving to London for a while, I was mesmerized by seeing the paintings of Victor Gerard, Francis Bacon, Lucien Freud, and their approach to convey the striking emotional intensity. I liked these qualities in the drawings of Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore also. Besides Kathy Kollwitz, my most favorite German artist, and Egon Schiele. All these influences grew on me to stimulate my senses to further develop my approach to portraiture. I had a privilege to paint many dignitaries in that period, like Mr. Vajpayee, President of Sri Lanka, and Senator Lautenberg. Recognition followed with the strong endorsement for Michael Verbob, who is considered the portraitist of the century. Uh, he has painted all the royal families across the world, all the heads of states also. He honored me by requesting to make a portrait of him at the age of 94. And this portrait is now a part of permanent collection of the Museum of United Nations Hall of Fame. While traveling across the world, I encountered various personalities from different cultural backgrounds. Some kind of universal power was holding them together, making harmony, and I think it was a global spirit. I could sense the dialogue between the human soul and cosmic power, and a new thought of expression was born. You could probably see a couple of paintings in that series upstairs. I call it Spirit Within. In portrait, the figure became larger than life, but it also gave ample importance to the space around. Those are the paintings. Well, can you show the slide? Not, yes, this one. And the other one also. There are two paintings. The importance was given to the space around. That space was depicted with enigmatic abstract forms. It was figurative and abstract together, combined and balancing the painting with harmony and contrast. A large number of paintings with larger than life, about 7 to 8 feet faces and figures, they were made, they were created, complementing the powerful background, and this happened during this period. When I moved to Wyoming for a very short time, just to get the astonished and just to get astonished by the exclusive charm of nature, you probably must be knowing that glory of Rocky Mountains, it is well known. You probably must have been there, right? Yes. So the sound of water of Green River and the rhythmic whisper of the wind spurred me to express most differently. And it was beginning of pure abstraction. It was a coincidence that I happened to read a doha by Sant Kabir that resonated with me to a greater degree to become metaphor for my life and my art. The words of Kabir were deep spiritual strength. I celebrated these feelings to make complete series of work in abstract. Those are, some of them, they are here. That gave me tremendous pleasure. It just happened. These paintings, the urge coming from within, it just happened. And I realized that every creative action is happening. You cannot force it to happen, and neither can you stop it from happening. For me personally, the explosive energy surge gives the capacity to deal with the figurative and the abstract. And after all, it illustrates the concept of duality, where both are different and both move in tandem. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that heartfelt rendering and sharing with us. And I have questions which I will come back to you when we do the audience round of questions. I also have a few questions that I will put to you. Now, we were to go to Manish Pushkale, but he is not able to log in. So I think he is traveling and maybe he's commuting. We'll go straight to Rahul. Rahul, would you like to jump in and
Jump in. Okay.
yes, give us your.
I think when Georgina, you and I spoke about this exhibition and more specifically about what you want to discuss in this panel today. I think what was interesting, what emerged, and I'll sort of go ahead and just share that. Looking at the school that you specifically come from. You spoke about Palsekar, you spoke about Kolte. It's obviously the Bombay gang, the Bombay group. And you cannot ignore the progressive artist group that was formed in '47. But what's also very interesting and something that I did not realize for a very long time, that the progressive artist group actually sort of was formed and stayed for a very short time. It was formed in '47 and it got dissolved in '56 because both Raza and Souza both left India, and it sort of automatically just sort of dissolved itself. The other important thing is also, I don't know if it is factually correct or not, but the entire group never really had a show ever together. Absolutely. So that is what makes it interesting, that the influence about the ideology of what should Indian art and contemporary art mean.
I want to jump in on this and say that they did have an exhibition together, but they were not called the Progressives at that time.
Okay,
At
so
the Bombay Art Society, they had a group show with Hussain, Souza.
When was this?
This was way back in 60s, yeah? It was in the 60s.
But it was after '56 then?
Yeah, it was after
Then
56.
it was probably after '56, so the group had disbanded, right?
No.
'56 the group disbanded?
No, they had it before then. It was not in, because
Okay.
Kemol has got the photograph of them sitting together, and they had the first exhibition at Bombay Art Society, just, where the museum gallery is now.
Yes.
There. So that they had that first show then, and they were together, and they all showed their canvases and everything from Kemol only, that Kemol did the framing for them.
Okay, so then
Yeah.
then factually maybe.
But it was not known as the Progressive Artist Group.
There was. Correct. So Ara was very much a part of that. Now, so correct. And but Palsekar launched Bombay Group of Artists, right? And not progressive. It is Bombay Group of Artists, and he did that after '56 or in 1956 itself, right? Now, in that also Ara and Gade, both from Progressive Artist Group, but they were also part of this new group that sort of got formed. Now, why all of this is important? In my mind, I think the Progressive Artist Group was interested in, the freedom of content and technique. It is that liberated feeling post-independence, but also a lot of questioning of, what should Indian contemporary art be. A lot of the references that sort of one sees of the artists of Progressive Artist Group had a lot of influence of either Cubism or a lot of elements that were still very, very recognizable, right? Either figures or non-figures, but very recognizable forms, right? So I think this is important for us to look at as to how Palsekar, who studied under Bendre, went to J.J., also then became a teacher, right? And Kolte sort of completely took a departure from creating work which is in the true sense non-representational of absolutely anything, right? Correct. But this genre that developed with Kolte sir, etc.,
Yes.
really took on a turn which is more like in 60s
Yes.
of totally non-representational work.
Correct.
And I want to just quote something that Mr. Kolte had said. I met him once in his studio and in Bombay, and he was just sharing a lot of stories. But one of the anecdotes sort of that I remember still, he was asked as a student to make an animal form. That was an exercise for everyone. And he ended up making a very absurd looking form with 4 heads and 1 leg, something, you know. And the teacher sort of obviously just sort of threw a fit. And he said, well, that's what it means to me. That's what it is. If you don't like it, then so be it, right? So totally questioning anything which means much. And that's why it's, I want to read very quickly, so just 30 seconds. Intangibles, and importantly, most of his works remain untitled, right? It symbolizes a state of vision, is what he says, his work for himself, neither representative nor interpretative. So he's actually not even asking people to interpret his work. It's not even expressive or illustrative. So really, then what is it? He says the subject is not important. Rather, the experience of it is what is important. That's his desire from his audience. And singularity of color, textures, I think all of that really became more critical. So there is nothing that you can relate to or recognize in a work. That sort of a departure, a very strong departure, I think this group, really had at that time, which is more like 60s, mid-60s in Bombay.
So you're going to wrap it up there?
Yeah, I mean, just wanted to sort of, we're specifically talking about this genre and really the origin of it.
Yeah.
So I thought this little putting the two in context, I thought would be interesting.
Yeah,
and would be important.
Yeah, I would just like to add to that. There were lots of other factors as well. Where they were dealing with the very sort of local elements to begin with, and that kind of faded back a little bit. And they embraced what would be seen as the tantric aspect.
Correct. Yes.
Even though they didn't go with that name, but there was a kind of an influence of that thinking, because the idea of abstraction not only came from Rothko and the West. That's what we all tend to think, but there was a kind of an abstract thought coming from the Upanishads and from the readings of the Purans, which they embraced as well.
So I think the tantric readings and the literature is also a lot about energy.
Yeah.
It's a lot about the intangible, the forces. So I think some of that relation entering into the work, became obvious. But that's a valid point that you make.
Just that bring that point in. Okay, lovely. Thank you, Rahul, so much for sharing that. Now, do we have Shukla? Is she there?
I'm here.
Shukla, would you like to join us in this discussion by bringing in the Delhi perspective? We've talked a little bit about Bombay, so I would turn to you to tell us about Delhi.
Okay. So Delhi has a very interesting history because, as you all know, the art school here started fairly late. Prior to the Delhi College of Art starting, you had the Sharda Ukil School of Art, which was perhaps the last remnant of the Bengal school, and this used to operate out of Connaught Place. But with the partition, something very interesting happened. Overnight, the population of Delhi doubled. A whole lot of artists who were based out of Lahore. Some of them moved straight to Delhi. Some were, in fact, a year before partition actually happened. But someone like Babesh Sanyal, for example, his autobiography has been serialized in a newspaper. I was coming across these cuttings in the 80s, and he tells a very interesting story of what the art scene in Lahore was prior to partition. You also had a very official art world in Delhi because the All India Fine Arts and Crafts Society, which was set up by the Ukils, had acquired a pan-Indian presence. And they were doing annual exhibitions, and because it was Delhi and it was the new capital, quite early on, many international artists started participating in their annual exhibitions. In the 1950s, we know that there was a whole lot of interest in building institutions. The National Gallery of Modern Art, for instance, the Lalit Kala Academy in Delhi was set up. You had Al-Qazi moving from Bombay to Delhi for the National School of Drama. And that ecosystem that came into existence was really, really fascinating. Uh, but you also had artists, like Satish Gujral, for instance, who had studied at the J.J. School of Art and in Lahore. The cohort circle around Babes Tanyal was very interesting. You had people like Charles Fabry, you had Anna Molka Ahmad, who was this, very interesting artist from England, who was also doing radio programs. You had Amrita Shergill, of course, in Lahore. And the art world there, was extremely cosmopolitan. And they brought that kind of cosmopolitanism with them when they came to Delhi. And then, of course, a little later, you have, the Delhi College of Art was largely, the faculty members were largely from the Government College of Art in Calcutta. So you had, Bhavesh Sanyal, of course, who had done this very interesting detour via Lahore to come and teach in Delhi. But later you also had people like Shomnath Hor, right? You also had Jagmohan Chopra. You had a second generation of artists like Anupam Sood, who had to struggle to get into an art school. I mean, she tells me that, just trying to get into the Delhi College of Art was such an exercise because they did not accept women candidates at that point in time quite easily. But the offshoot of this official art world of the All India Fine Arts and Crafts Society is the Delhi Shilpi Chakra. The Delhi Shilpi Chakra tried to penetrate the All India Fine Arts and Crafts Society. These were all artists who had come from different parts of India, and they unfortunately could not do it, and so they decided to create an alternative platform, which is the Delhi Shilpi Chakra. It used to operate out of the Connaught Place central circle, but it was actually not a homosocial world of male bonding that you see in the Bombay Progressives. There were many women in that group. So the exhibitions as well. Many of them were organized in Connaught Place. They also did exhibitions in Delhi University. And there are fragments of information that you get in press clippings, etc., about what they were trying to do. They were trying to engage and create a new kind of a public for their art. And in terms of the curriculum in Delhi College, the first initial impulse was academic, because in fact Dhurandhar, who was at the J.J. School of Art, had come here to initiate the Delhi Polytechnic. And so the curriculum was, like the kind of curriculum that they had at the J.J. School of Art. The MS University Baroda curriculum is a little different because it was a post-independence development, and it was, the people involved in developing that curriculum were brought by Markand Bhatt, who had actually studied in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia at that point in time, in the 1940s, there was a mass exodus of people from Germany under Nazi rule, and most of them had landed up in Philadelphia. So they brought the Bauhaus training to Baroda. And so you had a very interesting ecosystem there as well, because you had K.G. Subramanian, who had been to the Slade School of Art and then also worked at the Weaver Service Center. You had, the first generation of artists from Bhavnagar who came to Baroda and then got scholarships to study in the United States. Jyoti Bhatt, for instance, he also studied in Italy. You had Bendre, who had actually traveled to the Far East, to China. Bendre is a very interesting case in point because Bendre was actually from Indore. And Indore, he used to come very regularly to Bombay to study see the exhibitions, etc. And across the whole of Bombay presidency, you had a uniform exam system even at the school level. So basically, whatever you learned in in J.J. School of Art, etc., you could actually sit in Indore and do those exams and qualify. And in fact, you'll find that if you look at the annual reports of the J.J. School of Art from the 1930s, you'll even see Hussein's name, because Hussein did have some amount of academic training because he had studied, the kind of stuff that they teach in schools. And then, of course, he did not make it to the J.J. School of Art. But so, Bendre ended up actually, before moving to Baroda, working as the Press Information Bureau officer in Kashmir. Kashmir at that point in time, Srinagar was also an extremely cosmopolitan place. It was directly connected to Lahore by railways. And so there were many artists from across the world who were living and working in Srinagar. Uh, and but after partition, you have this strange kind of a cleavage. And Bhavesh Sanyal, for instance, in his autobiography, says very interesting things about how he never thought he was going to leave Lahore permanently, and he left all his artwork behind and didn't think that he would not get it back. But he does return to Lahore and he tries to retrieve his paintings, and then he's stopped at the border. He cannot bring anything back. And then in Delhi, they are given what are called refugee properties to set up studios. So there's a mass exodus from here. Sadiq Khan, for example, was in Delhi. He used to work for the All India Radio. And then he had to actually leave and go to Lahore. And you had Bhavesh Sanyal coming over here. And so all the properties that had been left behind by people migrating from here to there, they were given to artists over here to set up studios. So Bhavesh Sanyal got this studio in Gold Market, which became a very important hub of art activity. And so, you have an official art world of the Lalit Kala Academy, etc. You have Mulk Raj Anand, who's active with the Lalit Kala Academy, is of course also running Marg out of Bombay. But the annual art exhibitions, the national exhibitions, etc., become very important platforms. The All India Fine Arts and Crafts Society annual, exhibitions become an important platform. And so, later you have groups like 1890, which is a printmaking, society of sorts that comes up in Jagmohan Chopra's house, who's teaching at the Delhi College of Art. So it's just really attracts people from all over. That makes it very different from perhaps Bombay and Calcutta at that point in time. So would you want me to add to that? I can show you works if you like.
So the mic is not working. Can you make the mic work, please? The mic is working. Sorry, I'm just going to use my voice then in that case. What did you do? Where would you place someone like Swaminathan in this whole setup? I'm really intrigued by his presence because he brought in
So
the aspect.
Swaminathan is, yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Let's not get fooled by his name. He's actually lived and born and brought up in Shimla. And so he comes to Delhi and subsequently, as you know, goes to Poland. And when he comes back, he becomes a very important, person within the Shilpi Chakra, but also the group 1890. And so even if you look at the journal Contra, that does not have a very long life, but just that he's such a polemicist that he's able to constantly upturn the status quo, right? So that's because he is, in some sense, a provocator, an Asian provocator.
You'd be seeing him as a provocative figure who upturned a lot of and brought a lot of questions to the art world, and then in a sense, sort of gave a shake to this whole division of what we are seeing as figurative and abstract, and the kind of even the academic realism, sort of questioning that, right?
So, when you think of abstraction in the way it unfolded in the West, you have Rodchenko paint 3 canvases, one red, one blue, and one yellow, and state in 1919 that, you know, the capacity for paint to represent everything is over. That everything that paint could do in terms of its imitative properties, that's over. And so art has to move in a completely different direction, right? This is happening in 1919. And you have a similar kind of an inquiry, of course, at the J.J. School of Art, but nonetheless, you have, as others have said, a looking to forms, tantric art, etc. But again, you have to be a little cautious about the category of tantric art, because we also know that it is in some sense an invention of the festivals of India. If you've read Rebecca Brown's essay, a very, very interesting essay where she looked at the work of P.T. Reddy. And what appears to be on surface a painting that's drawing upon tantric art is actually a painting about the landing of the Apollo on the moon. Right. And so if you actually look at the Festival of India, for instance, the whole mandala pattern, etc., which is the design of the exhibition, that it's arranged in such a way that because you have to, it's quite interesting that almost all staging of Indian art in the West has to happen through a filter of othering. There is a complete, and there have been enough debates about that. You've seen, that whole journal thought text, and Rashid Arain's, point of view is that there is a refusal to recognize that we are living in simultaneous contemporary times, and we can be part of that same histories. We may have different references from time to time, but we are in conversation with each other. Right. And so to construct something as having a completely different trajectory is a ridiculous thing to do in our times. For example, we know that Al-Qazi was organizing exhibitions called This is Modern Art in the 1950s in Bombay, in the Jahangir. All embassies and international culture centers had also started staking a claim on the cultural world. The Fulbright Fellowship had started. You had Elsa and the Elsa and this person who stood Elsa Hirsch and Stephen and Elsa Hirsch, right? Elsa Hirsch was a historian of Mexican art. She was giving lectures on Mexican muralism and how Mexican artists had appropriated pre-Columbian art into their mural program to make very modernist work. They were looking at Eisenstein, they were looking at pre-Columbian art, but they were looking at Italian Renaissance and producing modernist work. All these, these lectures were being given in Bombay at the Art Society of India. They were being given in, Baroda, MS University, Baroda. You also had Satish Gujral himself, who went and studied under Sequeiros in Mexico, right? So unless and until we map all these conversations that are happening, we end up creating these very polarized kind of histories of, society in conversation with each other, whereas they've always been in conversation with each other.
Right, right. Thank you so much for that. Now I'm going to jump in and say, get Samar to comment on the idea of photography, because that is an area which is very interesting in terms of, bringing the figurative and the abstract into the modern and then contemporary. So we're doing a bit of a time travel over here. So we're going straight into the 90s, and I will hand you the mic so that you can take over.
First of all, I don't know how I fit in here, but
I
share my
think
experience here. I think as Rahul very rightly said, what he was mentioning, it's really sharing experience. What goes on the wall or on the frame or collector and buyer and critique and all that is very, very secondary. Photography, as you know, is a very new tool in this part of the world. It hasn't got its space yet, but those struggles are there because, and then what could really spoil the party is the disruptive technology has come in, and it's just a lot of digital noise today, and you really wonder who's trying to say what to you. My personal experience, I can share a couple of things. Some of you know the kind of work I do is really conflict related. It's about this whole inclusion. It's about this urbanization and consumption culture and how displacement and migration. I mean, there's a whole long list of that. I just want to share one or two pieces here. These are really looking at, when I say collaboration, I think it's the first one. Yeah, so this is, I'm sorry. It's really
I'll just go back to the first slide. Anjali, the portraits, small one.
Yeah, no, yeah, so these are, you can zoom into this, so I think they can see, yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
So, again, this is, working in documentary space, corporate documentary space in Dubai, photographing the world's tallest tower. It was a hardcore commercial work, but what was most interesting for me was identity issue of people, migrant construction workers. And this was done about, the process was about, I would say, 2005 or 6 when the tower got announced. So most of these people, they came from North Africa, South Asia, all the way from Philippines. And most of them were never photographed. And when they had to get a passport, they had to have a picture. Most of them weren't literate. They were, they couldn't even write their name. But you had to learn how to write your name because that's the only way you could get a passport. And they arrived in this space that was a very modern tech-related, development. There were 3,500 men building that tower. And I decided, let's recreate their passport picture one more time. So I made 3,500 portraits. So these are all, so they're all stamp size. I created another experience with that, which was on weekends before all these smartphones and, WhatsApp and that arrived. They would go on Fridays when they would have their break into these phone booths where they would share their phone cards and they'd be calling up back home, all kinds of places. So I actually recorded a lot of that sound also. I couldn't hear the other side and with their permission. So there were different languages, dozens of languages. And the whole idea, finally, this show was about, it was a seamless show, in a space where you just have passport pictures backlit with each LED. And you go in there and what you see is just thousands of men holding that plate, which is where they are writing their name on it, which is how we photographed it, and in different languages. And you have this sound piece playing with, you may understand Farsi and Telugu and Nepalese or Swahili or whatever that is. So it was just a combination of all that. Unfortunately, it didn't get shown. I was going to be at Sharjah Binale, but I think got too political. So had to withdraw from there. So anyway, going back to our focus of, you can switch to the next image,
the
please.
next image, please. Just an observation, that these portraits, they were not sort of posing for flattering photographs. It was documentary. But then when you mounted it and you showed it with the languages, it kind of gets translated. It becomes then a political work. So just can you talk a little bit about that process? Give us a little window.
Yeah, so we can talk about another body of work.
Yeah.
This is Outpost, which was at the Venice Biennale way back in 2013. These are all metal works. Now, when we talk about portrait or when we talk about photography, it's a very given space, it's that kind of form and what kind of picture it'll be. These are something very, and you can't unfortunately see it here, but these are basically spines. I had worked in these communities in middle of, Northeast, in these mining communities. And these are people who are migrant workers. They are not even like other mining towns where you have children and women and all that. These are just men. You have no idea these pits they work in, they live there, they die there. It's just a very unfortunate, very, very crazy space. So I recreated that experience where I used to be a commercial photographer right in the beginning of my career 30 years back. So where I was shooting all these fancy hotels and all that, and of course making lots of money out of it. But when I landed up in Northeast, looking at these shacks, which were just made out of these metal cans, which they used to pour tar and make temporary roads. So they would flatten that. There was no engineers, there was no skill of any kind, just raw skill of building these, these pieces of, I would say, most amazing piece of architecture, So it was like a antithesis or whatever. So I started photographing that, film days, of course. And many years later, I thought, let's pull this out and let's try to do something else with it. So I went to Mazgaon in Bombay. I met metal workers there, and we got all this scrap, brass and copper and MS and all that stuff. And we let it get treated in the salt and the humidity of Bombay, all that patina, all that. And then I took these pictures, stripped all the colors off, and then we printed this on top of this metal thing. And so, it took its own shape. So I'm not talking about the skill. I mean, that's the boring part of it. But what I'm trying to say is that, a lot of this work, if you can switch to the next one also, so what you see here, finally, these spines are really the metaphor of, and they're really hanging up on the top in these really high ceiling. It's, it's your destiny. You're just hanging in there. And these are, and also, yeah, because it used to rain, it rains a lot out there, as you guys know. So whenever it would pour, you would just go and sit under these sheds, and then you have this very heavy metal sound coming on top. So I recorded that, and we slowed down that sound, and that would play in this place. And it's like almost, like a Chinese torture, where you are, or maybe it's human sweat. It's about your suffering, So these are all also, when we talk about portrait, I look at it that way, where how do you get the human experience, whether it's abstract or whether it's the obvious photograph or obvious portrait. So if we go to, so the next one. So now here what we have is, this is a very different kind of space. This was shown at the, some of you might have seen it at the 2012 art fair. And these are big cement blocks. And this is work which I've done in Vietnam and China and Far East, as well as Middle East and South Asia and all that, about migrant workers. And these are things where people would do graffiti on these walls, let's say on Burj Khalifa. And then you have Armani coming in and covering them with the most fanciest walls on top, but that stuff still exists inside. So I photographed thousands of them over a period of time. So this work, what you unfortunately, it's very dull here, but it's really a representation of that experience, what you're talking. And I think just bringing that together. So for me, it's not really, it's my work. Actually, it's work coming from so many experiences, and they were like very moving image, and there were obviously no names or no stamp or no signature on it, and it had its own, it was very sexual in a lot of them, because a lot of men who work in these places, there are no there's no other way they can express. Or you had some guy who had drawn a bull with really crudely run with a black ink, and I don't know where he got some color, and the bull had red ink coming out of his eyes. It's so there was a lot of stuff going on. I mean, each of them were a story. So my attempt was only to capture it and create. And the reason it's printed on concrete, obviously, because that's the larger struggle of a human being, where they are building our beautiful habitats, Northeast in those mining communities, so I can sit in this light and air conditioning, or for that matter, living in that fancy Armani hotel or the tallest tower in the world and blah blah, all that stuff. But each of them have such stamp, or let's say fingerprints or thumbprints or whatever, of their personal experience. And for me, that is really what I would call as portraiture. So sorry, that was a very long one, but that's
No, it's lovely to hear that aspect of the portrait, and see the translation as well. If you've seen Samar's work at the art fair, also we had that APJ show where, which is solo, where the metal works were shown. Yeah. And then subsequently we had a show, a group exhibition as well, where we saw the part of, but now I'm going to go to Archana, then we can open it up.
We just a
Just
quick
last,
30-second
yeah.
interjection here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting that someone is talking about portraiture, what he does, but is adding a lot of other sensorial experience
Sound as
for
well, yeah.
you know, the sound and the way he's creating. It's end of the day portraiture, but with a lot of expression.
Right.
A lot of parallels that I draw with the discussion we had just now, seeing your works. They're portraiture, but there's just so much more that is beyond just the face around it, and that comes from your experience and your connect, etc. So I mean,
Yes.
I see
No, no,
that
lovely that you
interesting
say that.
parallel there. That's
True.
all. Anu.
Yes. And now handing over to Archana, where you'll be telling us about your experience with Arts for All and Champatry, and your experience of the contemporary artists, really, the younger.
So, thank you, because today, when Georgina asked me to, she told me to give my take on, uh, about my Arts for All journey. And it took me back, to, we are today, this is our 10th year since Arts for All, started. And what started as an experimentation, it was an experiment when we started. It's Arts for All is a not-for-profit organization which we started. We have, so we worked with young artists, and through residencies, through public art projects and exhibitions. So we have worked with very young artists who are probably just out of college or just at the beginning of their careers. So, and from what I have seen is that these artists are not confined to any one, one style. They have, there is so much of information. There are they have, just a second. So for them, their visual language is way more important than the technique or the medium they use. Their concept, their ideation is way more important. So whether it's figuration, I mean, this is the topic, this is the subject you asked me to touch upon. So that's the reason I'm, stressing on that. So there you do see a lot of, their works explore the notions of, duality, multiplicity, and you see that through their the reflection in their experimentation. And so, I mean, can you show the slides also of the artists? So we also see, freed aesthetics, in terms of, there is merging, there is you can just keep sharing these. So like I said, there is, this is Vishwanath Kutum. So, you see this is a form, it's a shivling, and he's shown the eye. And so it's a play of, again, the figuration and his abstraction and his tribal background. Next, please. Here again, you see, this is a portrait, or, a picture, drawing of an elephant, but it's kind of fading away, and he's woven layers of memories. This is Srinivas Bulagam. So these are all artists that we've worked with through residencies. Next, please. So this is an interesting one. This is Raj Yadav. And so you see these, very stark portraits, but he's also has a lot of lettering, and there is this layering, which kind of makes you think maybe there's some turmoil, like Samar just spoke about how he's added layers to his, the portraits. They're not just simple portraits. You see a lot of layering through the play of medium, that, the play of colors and the play of, I mean, I'm forgetting the word, but this is oil on canvas. No, oil. No, oil and acrylic actually is used for. Yeah, it's oil and acrylic both. Yeah. So next, please. You remove that, right? So, well, these artists, they are not confined to any one medium. They do not want to be, they don't want to be bracketed into any isms. They don't care much for that. They care more for their. This is the one I'm going to show. So there is, I'm going to repeat, there's freed aesthetics, which combines, merges, blends, and overlaps techniques, styles, topics. So it's not just one thing that you see. There is so much of action happening. There is freedom. There is so much of overload of information that you see. They are not talking only in one particular language. They are more concerned about uh, showing what, seeing. A lot of them are drawing or picking up. They want to talk about things that they're seeing, the environment. It could be personal experiences. It could be, something to do with your, could be rooted, could be about histories. So this is, I think, oh, that slide couldn't come in.
No, not possible.
No worries, no worries.
Okay, no worries. So, I will, we can always share this PDF for anybody who wants to see it. We can send it across. Yeah. And, but, just to talk a little bit about now with this contemporary younger generation, I would say that there's a lot more freedom of movement, that you have observed. And if you can talk a little bit about how that is taken by the collector generation, how, because they are belonging to times, they've seen the whole, coming from Usha's time, when there was that strict sort of, oh, this is figuration, that is abstraction. Now there's a lot of borrowing, merging, and then you have, yeah, and you have the internet as well. So how does that sort of effect, and what is the reaction between the curator and the artist?
You know, like I said, they are these Instagram, you call them the Instagram age, Instagram artists, literally. There is over information, and even I think since COVID also has happened, a lot of the pandemic, it let artists to kind of really expand their horizon. And even though they could not travel to different places, they did. I'm sorry, I didn't get your question. Can you just?
My question is the interaction between, now, because they are borrowing so freely, and that the sort of the historical division have all gone blurred in many ways. So how do the people who are collecting that work react to it? What would they say to you?
Well, I think it does not matter whether it is a mix or it is a pure abstract work or it is a pure, figurative work. The work has to be strong. It has to speak. So that's what a collective, they are not looking at all. And I think there is that very interesting blend of and maybe they're doing so unintentionally. It's not something that you do it with purpose. Oh, and literally the pure abstract work that you see, they're only a handful, really. It's more of, everybody wants to be using different mediums, different, to talk about their concerns or what they want to show. And collectors are very happy to, as long as it's an original, it's imaginative, it's creative, it is reflecting all that. I mean, that's what makes the work more interesting, I would say. Unless, of course, one, all of us have different likings and dislikings, right? So I guess it's something very personal then.
So thank you so much for sharing your experience with Arts for All and Champatri with us. And anybody who wants to know more can always get in touch. And now I'm